The enduring romantic saga of Pride and Prejudice opens in the bustling social sphere of Hertfordshire, dominated by the conviction that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. This maxim serves as the life's pursuit for the ambitious Mrs. Bennet, who seeks husbands for her 5 daughters. Hope arrives with Mr. Charles Bingley, a wealthy, amiable young man who leases the estate of Netherfield Park. At the first assembly, Bingley immediately validates Mrs. Bennet's aspirations by becoming captivated by the eldest daughter, the serene and lovely Jane Bennet. However, Bingley is accompanied by his friend, Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy, a gentleman of vast estate, 10,000 a year, and impressive figure, who instantly draws the room's admiration. Darcy quickly ruins his own popularity by displaying profound arrogance. He is discovered to be proud, to be above his company, and above being pleased. His disdain is personally directed at the quick-witted, independent Elizabeth Bennet when he dismisses her as tolerable, but not handsome enough to tempt me. This slight sets the immediate groundwork for Elizabeth's deep-seated prejudice against him. The conflict escalates with the arrival of the militia in nearby Meryton, where Elizabeth encounters the charming officer, George Wickham. Wickham possesses an unassuming manner and a pleasing address, making his story instantly persuasive. He relates a tragic tale of being cheated out of a valuable living by the cruel and jealous Mr. Darcy, claiming Darcy violated the last wishes of his kind father, Wickham's godfather. Elizabeth, confirming her initial dislike, readily believes Wickham's claims of such malicious revenge, such injustice, such inhumanity. The family is soon visited by the pompous, self-important Mr. Collins, a clergyman who is the heir to the Bennet estate, Longbourn, due to the entail. Collins views marrying one of the daughters as the perfect amends for inheriting their father's property. He chooses Elizabeth after Mrs. Bennet hints that Jane is destined for Bingley. Mr. Collins proposes to Elizabeth in a formal, dreadful speech, listing his reasons, duty to his calling, adding greatly to his own happiness, and the explicit advice and recommendation of the very noble lady whom I have the honor of calling patroness, Lady Catherine de Bourgh. Elizabeth, suppressing laughter and distress, flatly refuses, declaring herself not one of those women who risk happiness on being asked a second time. Her mother is furious, but her father sides with Elizabeth, delivering the famous ultimatum: "Your mother will never see you again if you do not marry Mr. Collins, and I will never see you again if you do." Shortly afterward, Bingley abruptly leaves Netherfield for London, sending a letter via his sister, Caroline, confirming that the entire party will remain in town for the winter. Elizabeth is quickly convinced that Bingley's sisters, and, more dangerously, Darcy, have conspired to separate Jane and Bingley, believing the Bennet family's low connections unsuitable for their friend. This suspicion seems confirmed when Charlotte Lucas, Elizabeth's friend, pragmatically marries Mr. Collins, viewing it as the only secure provision for well-educated young women of small fortune. Elizabeth is deeply disappointed that Charlotte has sacrificed every better feeling to worldly advantage. Elizabeth visits Charlotte in Kent, where she is frequently exposed to the authoritative pronouncements of Lady Catherine de Bourgh and sees Darcy almost daily, as he is Lady Catherine's nephew and a frequent visitor at Rosings. The drama intensifies when Elizabeth learns from Darcy's cousin, Colonel Fitzwilliam, that Darcy recently saved a friend from the inconveniences of a most imprudent marriage, confirming Elizabeth's worst fears about Jane and Bingley. In a moment of overwhelming emotion, Darcy appears and, struggling with his feelings, makes his first unexpected, yet ardent, proposal. But he cannot resist dwelling on his sense of Elizabeth's inferiority, and the degradation that marriage to her would entail due to her family's low connections and lack of propriety. Elizabeth, outraged by his pride and convinced of his villainy towards Wickham and Jane, responds with blistering scorn, telling him that his arrogance and selfish disdain have formed an immovable dislike, and that he is the last man in the world whom I could ever be prevailed on to marry. The next day, Darcy intercepts Elizabeth and hands her a detailed letter. This document overturns Elizabeth's world. Darcy defends his actions concerning Jane by explaining that her composure led him to believe her affection for Bingley was merely transient, or that she was indifferent. His major objection, however, rested on the total want of propriety uniformly betrayed by her mother and younger sisters. The letter then delivers the shocking truth about Wickham, exposing him not as a victim, but as a deceitful gamester who chose a cash settlement over the promised living, later attempted to seize the living again, and, most damningly, tried to elope with Darcy's young, 15-year-old sister, Georgiana, for her £30,000 fortune. Elizabeth, utterly humbled, realizes that she has been blind, partial, prejudiced, absurd, allowing her own vanity and prejudice to blind her to the appearance of merit and sense. She recognizes that Darcy's description of her family's misconduct was painfully justified. Later that summer, while touring Derbyshire with her uncle and aunt, Elizabeth visits Pemberley, Darcy's magnificent estate, believing him to be absent. She is deeply impressed by its beauty, its lack of awkward taste, and especially by the housekeeper's effusive praise of Darcy's character, describing him as the sweetest-tempered, most generous-hearted boy in the world, who is the best master and landlord ever known. This testimony conflicts entirely with Elizabeth's former view. The unexpected happens. Darcy returns a day early and encounters Elizabeth and her relations. The proud man she once knew is gone. He is perfectly civil, surprisingly gentle, and actively seeks the acquaintance of her uncle and aunt, who are in trade, people he had previously disdained. He even solicits permission to introduce Elizabeth to his beloved sister, Georgiana. Before Elizabeth can process this change, crisis strikes. Lydia, having gone to Brighton with Mrs. Forster, has eloped with Wickham, and there is serious concern that they are not married. Elizabeth is overwhelmed by shame and despair, feeling that this final disgrace will utterly ruin her family's reputation. To Elizabeth's astonishment, Darcy appears again and, upon hearing the dreadful news, silently disappears. Jane and Elizabeth soon learn that Darcy had secretly followed Lydia and Wickham to London and, acting entirely alone and without acknowledgement, performed the role of savior. He located the couple, learned that Wickham had no intention of marrying Lydia, paid Wickham's enormous gaming debts, considerably more than £1,000, secured him a commission in a distant regiment, and provided money, an additional £1,000, for Lydia's settlement, thus compelling Wickham to marry her and salvaging the family's honor. Darcy forces Mr. Gardiner to take the credit, ensuring Elizabeth remains ignorant of the extent of his sacrifice. Elizabeth, upon learning the truth via a letter from her aunt, is overwhelmed by profound gratitude and realizes that he performed this noble AC. Entirely for her sake, despite the disgrace of becoming Wickham's brother-in-law. Bingley returns to Netherfield, now free of Darcy's controlling influence and convinced of Jane's reciprocal affection, and quickly proposes to her, restoring happiness to the eldest Bennet sister. The remaining obstacle is Lady Catherine de Bourgh, who, having heard rumors of a potential match between Elizabeth and her nephew, makes a dramatic, uninvited trip to Longbourn. She demands to know if Elizabeth is engaged to Darcy and furiously insists that the match must never happen, citing Darcy's presumed engagement to Miss de Bourgh and Elizabeth's lack of family, connections, or fortune. Elizabeth, demonstrating her newfound self-possession, refuses to promise anything, telling Lady Catherine she will only act in the manner that constitutes her own happiness. This conversation ironically provides the necessary catalyst. Darcy, hearing from his aunt that Elizabeth refused to deny a possible engagement, takes heart, realizing that her sentiments must have changed. He soon calls on Elizabeth, acknowledging that her rejection had taught him a necessary lesson and that he was properly humbled. He asks her feelings are still the same as in April. Elizabeth, though embarrassed, assures him that her sentiments had undergone so material a change as to accept his offer with pleasure and gratitude. Elizabeth and Darcy both confess their primary faults: Darcy's inherent pride, taught by a spoiled childhood, and Elizabeth's predisposition to willful misunderstanding and conceit. Their engagement is eventually secured after Elizabeth convinces her father that her affection is genuine, and Darcy settles the business with his indignant aunt. The story concludes with the two couples happily united, overcoming the initial pride and prejudice that had dangerously separated them, and Elizabeth looking forward to a life of comfort and elegance at Pemberley.